was a panel at University of Pennsylvania Law School, and the question is, when do we get reparations? Because every time Black folks talk about reparations, and given all of the moral and physical harm that's happening to Black people and that continues to happen as an outgrowth and part of the legacy of slavery, when like people talk about they want to do forgiveness, they want reconciliation, but I believe like after folks tell their stories, how do we heal moral harm? And some of the work that we've been working with in Fellowship of Reconciliation is putting on a public campaign on reparations, a public education campaign. And so we've suggested that how do we heal moral injury? And the first step is like listening to those stories and actually seeing not necessarily what is owed or how much is owed, but like seeing what is your part in complicity for that harm. Like and we've been talking about this all along. So if you got loans, right, in Detroit or even in Philly, where the report from the Center for Investigative Journalism just released how Black people across the country are denied loans systematically, and that came from a loophole in the Fair Housing Act, which was supposed to provide housing for people living in urban centers. And what banks have done is they've suggested that, what they've done in actuality is, 9 times out of 10, they're more likely to loan or give loans to white people.
I live in University City, which is actually a suburb of St. Louis, and we're dealing with a impending development. And so there are people in this community that I live in has a great and a history of having a great, kind of middle class African American community that was more or less brought here by, to desegregate this area. They wanted to have a vibrant middle class African American community, and there is one, and they're trying to put in a development. And the city is promising that there's going to be some kind of program that will help build up, the homes in the third ward, because right now the housing prices are stagnant. So I guess, one, what would you recommend to, or how would you recommend people that are trying to fight this? What would you recommend that some things that they do? Do you believe that community benefits agreements are worth anything? Do you think that there's any way that we could trust the city to actually do what's fair and right and actually build in an agreement to the contract? Because those are things that are being talked about. Right. And even if we get all of those things, won't gentrification still happen?
Well, let me go back to the community benefits agreement. We had 2 of those up in our last election, one from the city and one from the people. And they put out, the opposition put out that, the community benefits agreement that the people put together was not viable. So the folks, voted in, and you've got a lot of people who are paid to go out and work against your own people, So that community benefits agreement that the city came up with is now in effect, and it's not helping any of the neighborhoods. What I suggest to people is that you start organizing. You must organize. You must get groups of people to go to those meetings, have your voice heard, and keep fighting.
One thing that you said earlier too, and that I've seen in some of the work that I've done with the city that I live in, is that a lot of times you get these agreements or you get these commissions or boards that are put in place to do certain things for the community, and they may ultimately be good. However, if you get a new administration in that hires a new city manager, a lot of those things could go right out the window.
Right. And I would suggest that, like we have here in Detroit, it's called the Detroit People's Platform. They have a website, DetroitPeoplesPlatform.org, and they have a page that's dedicated to community benefits agreements that explains what it is and how people should support it.
And
So,
so one thing that we should ask, I mean, here's the thing. Our governments, city, state, they're doing very little. And people need to survive. And people are not able to survive as a direct impact of racism, direct impact of the legacy of slavery and the situation of blacks or the situatedness of black folks in this country.
right,
So,
right.
like, what are people owed? Like, are people owed from their white neighbors who are doing better? One thing that we saw is that in Germany, uh, and this is a particular case, after the fall of the wall in Berlin, dividing East and West Germany, the West Berliners and the West Germans paid what was called a solidarity tax to support the development of East Germans in East Germany because they knew that living alongside people who had experienced so much deprivation, right? Then
Right.
how are they gonna
Yeah.
survive? And that's gonna
I,
impact you.
Right,
yeah,
right.
I mean, I think that that's an amazing program. I think that that works well in a relatively homogenous community where those people believe that each other are cousins anyway. And I don't. I think that a sort of reparations tax isn't necessarily a bad idea. I just think that that would be Civil War II here in the United States.
Well, I was just gonna say I just want to follow up that point where you said lead to a civil war because the tiki torches in Charlottesville that came because the city of Charlottesville voted what they called equity, right? And they were essentially trying to support public schools, housing, and issues that a
Hmm.
historically marginalized black community in Charlottesville had always experienced. And then you see the Tiki Torch folks coming in right at that point, and the whole debacle of white supremacists and alt-right, et cetera, in Charlottesville. So I think that's a good point. But I also think that there are loads of good white folks out there, right? Quote unquote
I
good
do
white
too.
folks who say that they
Hmm.
want to help. And I think the deciding point has been when people ask for money, people will donate and, donate something and it'll come off their taxes or it's a tax write off. But what about like making a significant
Land,
contribution, right? Land or technical assistance or whatever? Because there's some groups out there
jobs.
right now who have gotten, I don't know if you all know Harriet's Apothecary in New York, and Soulfire
Hmm.
Farm has been one of the places that have been like individual acts of reparation, and I think
Right.
that might be the place to go. Individual acts of reparation, where white people are unraveling themselves from complicity in white supremacy and supporting black folks directly. And Uhuru has
Yeah.
support directly,
Yeah.
and then
Hmm.
Cobra's been working on this stuff for years as well.
Right.
I would
Like,
definitely like to see something around like land and housing, just because that's one of the things that we're talking about, and having that ownership of. And I don't even think that it necessarily even has to be urban areas, but I would definitely like to see a lot more, and especially larger homes. There are a lot of older white people who may not even have direct descendants who own homes that could be used for like community living. So
right.
I'd like to see something like that being put in place.
And not just that, when we even going back to the whole disaster capitalism and these, travesties where people are like losing homes, many of the people in New Orleans, much of that federal money went to second homes,
Right.
Yeah.
or
Well,
people's second homes are protected where people whose basic survival isn't even protected.
right.
Right.
Very quickly off of that Detroit People's Platform alerts page, there's a little blurb here that says our majority black neighborhoods have the highest concentrated poverty of any large city in the U.S., while millions in tax incentives have been given away to wealthy white developers downtown. The Free Press covered a damning new report on poverty in Detroit and across the U.S. Metro Detroit's poverty gets worse despite the city's comeback. A new look at the poorest urban cities in America, despite economic growth and increasing prosperity, puts Metro Detroit near the top of the list. The report ranks that Detroit area at number 5 in a list of impoverished communities.
Wow. Yeah, that's it's sickening. And let me just ask, like, what do you think Dick Gregory has to say about reparations? Like, what would be like the where that book is headed?
Well, one of the things that he mentioned in here was that he wasn't going to get free until everybody got free, and he didn't really talk about reparations in here, but he was just basically saying, that it didn't matter what color you are. If people didn't all stand up and fight together, basically, we're all at doom. And one of the ways that he got around a lot of the Southern racists was the fact that he was, basically telling them, what's happening to us is eventually going to happen to you, which is the same thing that we've been telling people here. If you allow this to happen and you allow these punitive laws to stay on the books, and then whatever happens to Detroit is coming to your town next. It's coming to your city next. I've been saying this for years. Detroit is the petri dish and the experimental dish, and whatever happens in Detroit, the rest of the nation will start to follow. All I can suggest is, keep going out there, keep telling the truth, keep having forums, keep having conferences, try to get more people involved, and wake up calls. Like you say, stay woke. Keep having those stay woke sessions with white people, brown people, black people, everybody, Asians, everybody.
And so I mean, I'm seeing some of this as like particularly like just this call for solidarity, solidarity.
You have to.
And I would just extract even more that Dick Gregory is basically saying, like, we got to support our neighbors and act in what the truth is telling us, and it's that folks have been suffering, and many white folks benefit from that suffering. So how do we heal that moral harm and forgiveness and crying and all of that stuff? Don't change the material conditions. Money does, and
and it doesn't.
Now is the time. Now is the time.
And the thing too is that one of the conversations I've had with other friends of mine is that it's not just the money condition; it's a psychological condition. How do you do the psychological damage that have been done? How do you undo my I talk about this all the time about, deprivation mentality and greed. How do you get rid of all of this me-ism and I-ism and put it into we-ism, and that, and stop working out of this deprivation mentality that causes you to sell out for a bag of potato chips or, take some payola under the table. We don't, you can't even trust half the elected officials, half the time. Especially here in Detroit, so many people are being backed. I've had so many folk come in here that don't even live in Detroit, knocking on my door, asking me for my vote. And they have no plan, no agenda. But somebody has paid for their campaign to come in my neighborhood and try to get our votes, But
so we are pretty much running out of time, but we just want to tell people to go visit We the People of Detroit.org. Check out Aurora's book, Solitude of 5 Black Moons. And also, if you can support by donating some water. People are going to need it. They're in the midst of a severe water shutoff. And think about, how do we heal moral injury? And we put a post up on our Facebook page for people to ask questions about reparations. And this podcast is going to come out in a couple of days. So by then we should have some questions. Aurora, are you open to coming back and responding on Facebook so that people can get a response? And
I would like to quickly say, don't forget about Flint. I just want to do the shout out for Flint because the governor just moved to close the water